Self-terminating is a really interesting idea that you talk about quite a bit. First of all, what is a self-terminating system? And I think you have a sense, correct me if I'm wrong, that human civilization as it currently is a self-terminating system. Why do you have that intuition combined with the definition of what self-terminating means?
Okay, so if we look at human societies historically, human civilizations, it's not that hard to realize that most of the major civilizations and empires of the past don't exist anymore. So they had a life cycle, they died for some reason. So we don't still have the early Egyptian empire or Inca or Maya or Aztec or any of those, right? And so they terminated. Sometimes it seems like they were terminated from the outside in war. Sometimes it seems like they self-terminated. When we look at Easter Island, it was a self-termination. So let's go ahead and take an island situation. If I have an island and we are consuming the resources on that island faster than the resources can replicate themselves, and there's a finite space there, that system is going to self-terminate. It's not going to be able to keep doing that thing because you'll get to a place of there's no resources left. And then you get, so now if I'm utilizing the resources faster than they can replicate or faster than they can replenish, and I'm actually growing our population in the process, so I'm even increasing the rate of the utilization of resources, I might get an exponential curve and then hit a wall and then just collapse the exponential curve rather than do an S curve or some other kind of thing. So self-terminating system is any system that depends upon a substrate system that is debasing its own substrate, that is debasing what it depends upon.
So you're right that if you look at empires, they rise and fall throughout human history, but not this time, bro. This one's gonna last forever.
I like that idea. I think that if we don't understand why all the previous ones failed, we can't ensure that. And so I think it's very important to understand it well so that we can have that be a designed outcome with somewhat decent probability.
So it's sort of, in terms of consuming the resources on the island, we're a clever bunch and we keep coming up, especially when on the horizon there is a termination point. We keep coming up with clever ways of avoiding disaster, of avoiding collapse, of constructing. This is where technological innovation, this is where growth comes in, coming up with different ways to improve productivity and the way society functions such that we consume less resources or get a lot more from the resources we have. So there's some sense in which there's a human ingenuity is a source for optimism about the future of this particular system that may not be self-terminating. If there's more innovation than there is consumption.
So overconsumption of resource is just one way a thing can self-terminate. We're just kind of starting here. But there are reasons for optimism and pessimism, then they're both worth understanding. And there's failure modes on understanding either without the other. As we mentioned previously, there's what I would call naive techno-optimism, naive techno-capital optimism that says stuff just has been getting better and better and we wouldn't want to live in the dark ages and tech has done all this awesome stuff. And we know the proponents of those models and that stuff is going to kind of keep getting better. Of course, there are problems, but human ingenuity rises to it. Supply and demand will solve the problems, whatever.
Would you put Ray Kurzweil in that or in that bucket? Is there some specific people you have in mind, or naive optimism is truly naive to where you're essentially just have an optimism that's blind to any kind of realities of the way technology progresses?
I don't think that anyone who thinks about it and writes about it is perfectly naive.
Gotcha.
But
so it's a Platonic ideal.
There might be a bias in the nature of the assessment.
Gotcha.
I would also say there's kind of naive techno-pessimism. And there are critics of technology. I mean, you read the Unabomber's manifesto on why technology can't not result in our self-termination, so we have to take it out before it gets any further. But also, if you read a lot of the X-Risk community, Bostrom and friends, it's like our total number of existential risks and the total probability of them is going up. And so I think that we have to hold together where our positive possibilities and our risk possibilities are both increasing, and then say, for the positive possibilities to be realized long term, all of the catastrophic risks have to not happen. Any of the catastrophic risks happening is enough to keep that positive outcome from occurring. So how do we ensure that none of them happen? If we want to say, let's have a civilization that doesn't collapse. So again, collapse theory. It's worth looking at books like The Collapse of Complex Societies by Joseph Tainter. It does an analysis of that many of the societies fell for internal institutional decay, civilizational decay reasons. Baudrillard in Simulation and Simulacra looks at a very different way of looking at how institutional decay and the collective intelligence of a system happens, and it becomes kind of more internally parasitic on itself. Obviously, Jared Diamond made a more popular book called Collapse. And as we were mentioning, the Antikythera mechanism has been getting attention in the news lately, but it's like a 2,000-year-old clock, right? Like metal gears. And does that mean we lost like 1,500 years of technological progress? And from a society that was relatively technologically advanced. So what I'm interested in here is being able to say, okay, well, why did previous societies fail? Can we understand that abstractly enough that we can make a civilizational model that isn't just trying to solve one type of failure, but solve the underlying things that generate the failures as a whole? Are there some underlying generator functions or patterns that would make a system self-terminating? And can we solve those and have that be the kernel of a new civilizational model that is not self-terminating? And can we then be able to actually look at the categories of X risks we're aware of and see that we actually have resilience in the presence of those? Not just resilience, but anti-fragility. And I would say for the optimism to be grounded, it has to actually be able to understand the risk space well and have adequate solutions for it.
So can we try to dig into some basic intuitions about the underlying sources of catastrophic failures of the system and overconsumption that's built into self-terminating systems? So both the overconsumption, which is like the slow death, and then there's the fast death of nuclear war and all those kinds of things. AGI, biotech, bioengineering, nanotechnology, my favorite, nanobots. Okay. Nanobots are my favorite because it sounds so cool to me that I could just know that I would be one of the scientists that would be full steam ahead in building them without sufficiently thinking about the negative consequences. I would be podcasting all about the negative consequences, but when I go back home, I just in my heart know the amount of excitement is a dumb descendant of ape. No offense to apes. So I want to backtrack on my previous comments about negative comments about apes. That I have that sense of excitement that would result in problems. So sorry, a lot of things said, but can we start to pull a thread? Because you've also provided a kind of a beautiful general approach to this, which is this dialectic synthesis or just rigorous empathy, whatever word we want to put to it. That seems to be from the individual perspective is one way to sort of live in the world as we try to figure out how to construct non-self-terminating systems. So what are some underlying sources?
Yeah. First, I have to say I actually really respect Drexler for emphasizing gray goo in Engines of Creation back in the day to make sure the world was paying adequate attention to the risks of the nanotech, as someone who was right at the cutting edge of what could be. There's definitely game theoretic advantage to those who focus on the opportunities and don't focus on the risks or pretend there aren't risks, because they get to market first, and then they externalize all of the costs through limited liability or whatever it is to the commons or wherever happen to have it. Other people are going to have to solve those, but now they have the power and capital associated. The person who looked at the risks and tried to do better design and go slower is probably not going to move into positions of as much power or influence as quickly. So this is one of the issues we have to deal with, is some of the bad game theoretic dispositions in the system relative to its own stability.
And the key aspect to that, sorry to interrupt, is the externalities generated.